Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is about what makes Spanish difficult. So if you compare lots of things in Spanish to other Romance languages, you see that there actually looks a lot easier. For example, in present perfect in French and Italian, some verbs use to be and some use to have. But in Spanish, every verb just uses to have. Spanish has masculine and feminine, but some things won't change depending on it. For example, possessive pronouns. They change for gender in French and Italian, but not in Spanish. Then finally, in French and Italian, they will change the endings of present perfect verbs for gender. But again, this doesn't happen at all in Spanish. So when I first saw this, I thought, wow, Spanish must be quite easy. All these things seem a lot easier than other languages I've studied, but it's not always that simple, and the things that make Spanish difficult make it quite difficult. So let's look at some of these. Pronunciation isn't that difficult in Spanish. Normally you read as it's written, but there is one thing that can make it slightly difficult. CI and CE will depend on the country. In South American Spanish, this is pronounced as S, but in Spain it's pronounced as a th. In South America, fácil. In Spain, fácil. It is the same with Z or theta. It's S in South America and th in Spain. Spain, perezoso. South America, perezoso. The real difficulty here is just getting used to hearing two types of pronunciations. So if you talk to someone from South America, they'll have a different pronunciation, and in Spain they'll have another pronunciation. And also if you choose, because you kind of have to choose which one you want to pronounce, if you choose the Spanish pronunciation, it can be quite a lot more difficult depending on the word. For example, this word, civilización, because you have to say it 3 times in the word. Verbs. Here we come to the thing that will probably give you the most problems in Spanish, and that is all the verb forms. Like in most Romance languages, verbs will change depending on the tense and depending on the person, and there are lots of forms to memorize. So for example, we have the present, yo hablo, the imperfect past, yo hablaba, the regular past tense, yo hablé, the conditional, yo hablaría, the future, yo hablaré, the imperative, habla, and the subjunctive present and imperfect, which doesn't have an equivalent in English, yo hablé, yo hablara. So there are quite a lot of tenses to learn, and this isn't all of it, because they actually change for each person as well. The endings depend on if it ends in AR, IR, or ER. What you do is take the end of the verb and then replace it with the given ending. This is for I, you, he, she, we, you plural, and they. But it's like this for all these tenses, and the list doesn't look like this, but actually like this. And this is a lot to remember. So I'm not including the perfect tenses here. These are where you add have. That's because it's generally really easy in Spanish. All you need to do is remember the word for have, and then you just put do at the end of the word. For example, ha hablado, ha ido, han pensado, has jugado. There are some exceptions, but they are quite rare and not too difficult. Ha dicho, han visto, has hecho. Going back to the regular forms, there is one tense that makes the language so much harder, and that is this one, which is used for the general past tense in Spanish. So why is this tense so much harder than the rest? Well, it's mainly because you talk about the past tense very often, and like 80% of the time, when you talk about the past tense, you're going to use this tense. So the main reason this tense is hard is because there are lots of irregular verbs, and also there is no alternative to using it. For example, with the future, you can simply ignore the conjugations if you want, and just use go to do. Like in English where we say going to do. I'm going to do. You say voy a ir or voy a hacer. You can just skip saying haré or iré. You don't need to say these at all. You can just say voy a. You can't do this with the past tense at all, and you have to learn all of these conjugations and all of the irregular forms. So here I'll show you some irregular verbs. On the left, I'll show you what it should be, and on the right, I'll show you what it actually is. So for to say, it should be like this, but they are actually like this. I don't know where the J comes from here, to be honest. For can, the O changes to a U for some reason, and some of the endings change. And the weirdest one, to be, these completely change and aren't even close. That's not all though. Let's look at to go. If this were regular, then it would look very weird because there would be only the ending shown. There's nothing before the ending. These are actually identical to the to be conjugations, and it's really weird because they're the same. So if you want to say I was and I went, it's the same word. And lastly, to have is similar to can. The A changes to a U. So speaking in the past tense is just really difficult in Spanish, and I rarely remember all of these conjugations. What I normally use is this text document to help me remember conjugations, but it's completely useless if the verb is irregular. You kind of have to remember the ending and the irregular form, which really doesn't help me most of the time. So as for the rest of the tenses, if they're irregular or not, really depends. For some verbs, some of the tenses are irregular, others none of the tenses are irregular, others all of the tenses are irregular. It really depends. Comparing with Italian, I'm not sure why, but I seem to have a lot more trouble with verbs in Spanish. I think it's mainly because verbs change a lot more depending on the ending. If it's AR, IR, ER, where it doesn't do that as much in Italian, I think that's why. Plus in Italian they always use present perfect, and they never use the basic past tense form, almost ever. Another thing that can complicate verbs is the fact that they use different pronouns in different countries. In Spain, for plural you, they use vosotros, and use this conjugation, vosotros vais. But in the Americas, they use ustedes, and they use the conjugation for they, ustedes van. In Argentina, for singular you, they use vos, and sometimes use a different conjugation, vos podés. And everywhere else, they just use tu puedes. Then, of course, you have the subjunctive, which is similar to most other Romance languages, which I'm more used to because I've studied other languages, but for people who haven't, it can be quite confusing and definitely adds difficulty. This is when you want to show doubt or an opinion or a command or something like that, normally with the word que, meaning that. For example, dudo que, quiero que, hasta que. For phrases like this, you don't use the regular present conjugations, but you actually use these conjugations. Then you also have the conditional sentences, where you want to say, if you did this, then. For that you use the imperfect subjunctive. For example, si supiera lo que pasó, te lo diría. If I knew what happened, I would tell you. Or, si tuviera más dinero, lo ayudaría. If I had more money, I would help them. This is definitely a lot more complicated than in English, because in English we just simply use the past tense. You can also give commands and wishes using the subjunctive. So instead of using the imperative, you can use the subjunctive, like ten un buen fin de semana. Que tengas un buen fin de semana. These are basically the same. You can choose which one to use, but I think it's probably harder to use the subjunctive form. Gender. In Spanish, nouns are masculine or feminine, and you normally tell the difference by the spelling of the noun. If it ends in O, it's masculine. If it ends in A, it's feminine. But there are quite a lot of exceptions to this. For example, la mano, el calma, el idiota, la radio, el sofá, el planeta, el idioma, la foto, el mapa. All these exceptions just kind of create confusion, really. Estar and ser. This is probably the easiest thing to confuse for anyone that hasn't studied a language with this difference. I guess Portuguese and Spanish has this difference. So in Spanish there are two ways to say to be. There's estar and ser. And the situations you use them can be quite confusing. Estar is normally used for things that are temporary And ser is used for things that are permanently true. For example, where are you? ¿Dónde estás? Where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? Because where someone is from is permanent. I always confuse this when speaking because there's no other language that has this difference that I've studied, and it's just really confusing, and it's just easy to forget because you're thinking about the verb conjugations and then you forget that you can't use that verb in that situation. And there are also some weird exceptions. For example, él está muerto. He is dead. So for some reason, being dead is considered a temporary thing. I don't understand that, but anyway. El edificio está en Londres. The building is in London. So for positions of buildings, we use estar as if it's temporary, which again I don't understand at all because buildings don't really move. So how is it temporary? I don't know. But then with events, we use ser. For example, el concierto es en el auditorio. The concert is in the auditorium. I don't know why this changes at all. Then it will change depending on if you're talking about a person or a thing. For example, estoy en el correcto. I am correct. La respuesta es correcta. The answer is correct. I don't really understand why this changes either, because they could both be temporary, so I don't know why we use one for the other. I don't know. There are also situations where you can use both, and sometimes the meaning changes. Está listo. He is ready. Es listo. He is smart. Using ser with ready is a way of saying someone is intelligent. Él es joven. He is young. Él está joven por su edad. He looks young for his age. The second uses estar because it's talking about how they look at one point in time. And lastly, ellos son esposos. They are spouses. Ellos están casados. They are married. I think the first one is a lot more rare, but you can say it. Basically, you're saying, what really confuses me here is that you're using different verbs for exactly the same thing. So one's considered permanent, one's considered temporary, which just really confuses me. Comprehension. So next we have something that is very hard for me to show with text. I could show examples, but I don't know if I'd show incorrect examples, and I don't really want to deal with copyright, so I won't do that. But that is understanding people. I don't know why, but Spanish people speak so fast, and there are lots of accents, so it's very, very hard to understand what people are saying sometimes. Sometimes they don't pronounce words fully, like instead of saying todo, they say to. They would skip the D sound, or they'll just speak really, really fast and you just can't understand, or they'll have a really, really strong accent. For example, people from Argentina, I really just can't understand. Or people from southern Spain, like in Andalusia, really, really fast, I can barely understand them. I haven't really had this problem in other languages. Lots of people say that, say for example, you say, oh my god, people speak so fast in Spanish. Lots of people will say, oh, that's just because you're a beginner in the language. You just need to get used to the sounds and then it'll become easier. It's the same with every language. Except it's not. It's not. I've studied Russian, I've studied Italian. I can understand people. I can't understand some people in Spanish at all. And it doesn't matter how much I practice, it seems like I still can't understand people. Anyone who wants to try this, just try looking up an interview from Sergio Aguero, the Argentinian footballer. I can't understand a word he says. And it doesn't matter how much I practice. But is there truth to the fact that Spanish people speak faster? Yes. Yes, there is truth. So there isn't lots of research into many languages, but researchers have researched some languages like Italian, English, German, Spanish, Chinese. And if you look at those statistics, which has been measured by syllables per second, so how many syllables are you saying per second? If you look at Spanish, it's about 26% faster than English. So on this website you can see that Spanish is 7.82 syllables per second, and English is 6.19, and only Japanese is slightly faster than Spanish. So combining all those things, it's the second most fastest language in the world. There's lots of accents, lots of different ways to pronounce things. People don't pronounce words fully all the time. Some people don't. Combining all these things, Spanish is one of the hardest languages to understand for foreigners. False friends. These are words that look similar to words in other languages, but have a different meaning. Here are some words that look similar to English words, but have a different meaning. Embarazada, disgusto, introducir, recordar, ropa. The first doesn't mean embarrassed, but means pregnant. The second one means dislike and not disgust. The third means to insert or to put and not to introduce yourself. The fourth means remember and not to record. And the last means clothes and not rope. This is normal though and goes both ways. There are always words that are confusing in one language or look similar in other languages but have a different meaning. For me, because I know Italian, this is a lot worse because there are lots of words in Italian that are really, really easy to confuse. So it's worse depending on what other languages you know. Confusing words. So the phrase porque actually has 4 meanings and 4 ways to write it. And this can be very, very confusing, but it's only really a problem if you're writing or trying to understand when reading. The first one that is separated and has an accent means why. ¿Por qué hiciste esto? Why did you do this? The second, without an accent and together, means because. Hice esto porque. I did this because. Together and with an accent means the reason. No entiendo el porqué. I don't understand the reason. And separated without an accent means for which. Esta es la razón por qué vine. This is the reason for which I came. As you can imagine, trying to remember these when you're writing can be quite confusing, and I often forget and have to look it up. But it's really only a problem when you're writing, because the pronunciation is the same. Lastly, we have something that isn't necessarily difficult, but just really, really weird. For some reason, in some situations, people will repeat pronouns. And I don't really understand this. I think it's for emphasis, but here are some examples. Te diré lo que mi padre me dijo a mí. I will tell you what my dad told me to me. Yo la visité a ella. I visited her to her. So I think this is for emphasis, and I've seen this when reading sometimes. It's quite weird. I'm not sure why they do this, but it is optional. You don't need to do this if you're speaking. So it's completely optional. It's just something that's really weird. But that is all for this video. Did I forget anything? Did I forget any difficulties you've had? Let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching.